Hello everyone, it's good to see you guys again today. Today we will be talking about a common phrase called the separation of church and state. This is a common phrase, but unfortunately it's one that's often misunderstood and misinterpreted. We will be discussing a debate. One side of the debate says that the government needs to be protected from religious influence. The other side says that religion needs to be protected from government control. So what's the point? What's the big deal? Why do we even need to be discussing this? One reason is that the Supreme Court cases are often built or reference previous Supreme Court case deciding outcomes. So once a decision is made, that court's decision can and will impact generations to come. So regardless of whether or not you have a religious belief system or not, it still impacts every citizen of our great country. So let's dive in and weigh the evidence by first discussing the opinions on both sides of this debate, and by finishing up with looking into the setting of when the Constitution was written, what was going on. Interpretation side number one. This side is most often based off of Jefferson's wall of separation statement that he made in a letter to the Danbury Baptist Association in 1802. The U.S. Supreme Court first cited this phrase, wall of separation between church and state, in the case of Everson versus Board of Education of Ewing, argued November 20, 1946, and decided February 10, 1947. The court claimed that there was to be a wall of separation between church and state, and that religious activities could no longer occur in the public realm. Now, the second side, or the second interpretation, is that what they're basing the phrase, separation of church and state, actually doesn't even occur in the Constitution at all. Right here, I actually have a copy of the Constitution, and you can see the First and 14th Amendments do not state anything regarding the separation of church and state. The Supreme Court's ruling that a wall of separation between church and state was based on words from a personal letter, not the Constitution. And even if we said that this letter had the weight of law, the court still misinterpreted and changed the meaning of what Jefferson actually meant. Thomas Jefferson and the Baptists he wrote to were men who supported states' rights in a limited, centralized government. Their primary concerns was that if the government could grant religious freedoms, they could also control it and then even do away with them altogether. In the 1947 case, the Supreme Court quoted only one phrase from Jefferson's letter to the Danbury Baptists. It did not show his complete letter, which contained all the context and explanations, but rather took one phrase and dismissed the rest of the letter. Former Chief Justice William Rehnquist wrote, "There is simply no historical foundation for the proposition that the framers intended to build the wall of separation that was constitutionalized in 1947. No amount of repetition of historical errors in judicial opinions can make the errors true," end quote. Now, what do we know about these signers in general? Dorothy Horton McGee tells us in her book, Framers of the Constitution, that there were 55 delegates with professions and occupations consisting of, first and foremost, over half of them were lawyers. Also merchants, physicians, planners, office holders, etc. She further tells us that all the convention delegates were men of religious belief. All of them. Even though there were a few who were non-church members, even those had religious beliefs and upheld them. Now we must take into consideration what was going on in the minds when the writers wrote the Constitution. Wallbuilders.com reminds us that the First Amendment was created by America's founders to avoid something like the government-run Church of England. America, a Land I Love textbook, published by Abeka Book, page 117, tells us that the United States was the first country in the world in which people could preach and practice their faith without some form of government control. So that's really what was in their heart and their minds. My conclusion. So what has changed since the Constitution was written? The intentions of our forefathers or simply our opinions? One side says that we need to completely separate religion and the government completely. The other side says, no, we just need to protect them both, particularly protect religion from the government. Our second president, John Adams, who stated in 1811 when writing to Joshua Quincy, "The Constitution, it is true, must speak for itself and be interpreted by its own phraseology. Yet the history and state of things at that time may be consulted to determine the bona fide intention of the convention," end quote. On that note, it was my intention today to present to you what I believe to be the true original intent of our forefathers, and to show you how wrong opinions can lead to misinterpretation. To end this discussion, I would like to leave with you a quote from James Madison, who was a member of the Continental Congress and who helped shape the Constitution. He says, "Do not separate text from historical background. If you do, you will have perverted and subverted the Constitution, which can only end in a distorted, bastardized form of illegitimate government. May we always remain one nation under God, indivisible." Thank you for your time and attention.